Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast, Product Content and Intelligence Powers Modern B2B Commerce. We're thrilled to have you all on the call today for our discussion, and we hope you'll find it interesting and useful. My name is John Evans, and I'm Director of Product Marketing at Akeneo, and I'm joined today by our special guest, Allen Bonde from Forrester.
Hey, John.
Hey, how you doing, Allen?
I'm doing great.
Allen is VP and Research Director, and he covers topics around the digital experience technology and services stack, and he focuses on the key strategies and building blocks for operationalizing high-impact, memorable customer interactions to drive growth, build loyalty, and meet accelerating market challenges, which sounds like a really cool subject area. Allen brings great insight and expertise to today's topic, so we're really excited to have him here. I'm sure everyone on the line has listened to a webcast before, so you know what to do. Sit back, listen, and ask us questions in the question window at any time, and we'll try to answer as many as possible at the end of the event today. We're also recording this event, so you'll be able to go back to it and refer to any of the content at any time. As you'll recall from the webinar invitation, today we're going to talk about how modern B2B commerce is taking on more consumer attributes due to digital transformation and the rise of marketplaces, and how these trends are requiring new digitally enhanced selling motions for manufacturers and distributors, and delivering a new view of product content, which is where Akeneo plays a role. So let's start with Allen and a view to the state of omnichannel commerce and how consumer style experiences are shaping the future of B2B relationships. Allen, over to you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, John, and thanks everybody for joining. So we're in interesting times here, right? That things continue to get disrupted, consumers continue to demand new experiences, and B2B buyers, in their consumer roles are seeing kind of the future of their B2B experience. So what I wanted to share is really for the next, say, 30 minutes or so, put some framing around what we're seeing in the market. What really is the state of B2B commerce? What are some of the forcing functions, the drivers for creating this change? And then dig in a little bit into what we see as just fundamental challenges, but also opportunities for sellers in this new environment. And then dig in a little bit deeper near the end into why we really think you need to, consider your product content, your product data, kind of more holistically as part of delivering an omni-channel experience. So let's dig right in. So right off the top, if you think about the future of B2B, in a way, our crystal ball is what's happening in the consumer world, right? That B2B commerce, whether you're a manufacturer or a distributor or a retailer or a dealer, it's increasingly clear that it's being disrupted in the same way, but in different ways that consumer models have been changing, right, over the last, say, decade or so. Mainly because of digital, but also because of behavioral changes, demographic changes. We can see this literally in our fingertips, right? The apps that we're using. This time of year, a lot of us are shopping online, and we're seeing the rise of B2B marketplaces, which we'll dig into on the sort of purchasing side. We're even seeing some interesting things happening in terms of delivering experiences right to the shop floor, right to the job site, or right to places within organizations where they can just order up a product, get it delivered that afternoon, or in some cases actually open the kiosk or the vending machine and get their safety boots or their replacement part right on site. So we're seeing this whole sort of transformation being influenced by consumer trends, but also we all know that B2B has a lot of characteristics that are unique and are different than the world of consumers. So that's sort of one of the key drivers, is that there's this disruption, and it's been working its way at an increasing pace into the world of B2B. The second core driver is, man, if you're a seller, you can enter new markets almost on a whim. Hey, you want to go into China? There's a marketplace for that. Hey, you want to launch a new line of maybe off-brand replacement parts? You can pop them onto Amazon Business next to other alternatives, or maybe some of those alternatives are already being sold on Amazon Business. So there's an amazing amount of opportunity for sellers to get into market, to run experiments, But, right, that's the good. With this good comes some challenge, right? So the overhead to manage all these new channels, because it's not kind of a one or the other in many cases, it's all of the above. That becomes more of an issue. Once you're starting to sell in this fashion, if you're selling on an e-store, you're selling through a digitally enabled kiosk, you're selling on a marketplace, what does it mean in terms of your sales motions when they're more in the style of direct to consumer than traditional channel selling? And then obviously, wherever you are, all of those points of presence, well, you need to surround those products with the right content on that right channel at honestly the moment of need. And so how do you own this new digital shelf, assuming that that's where you're going to be, can be more and more challenging. So this is something that we want to dig into, where there's some lessons and some top tips for sort of orchestrating and managing this sort of embarrassment of riches in terms of new channels. This is also prediction season, right? So I wanted to gaze into the crystal ball just for a second, because if you track Forrester, we put out probably 20, 25 or so predictions that have been rolling out since the November timeframe. The B2B predictions just came out. If you're not a client, you can actually see a blog post that Joe Sisman and I wrote on Forrester.com. There's also been some press coverage of these predictions. So I just wanted to highlight a few of these because we think this also gives some insight into what's going to happen, especially in the next year or so. So we kind of think of 2020 as a year where sellers broadly and manufacturers and distributors specifically are looking to sort of find some calm in this storm, right? They're looking to simplify their channel relationships even while they're testing out new channels. They're also starting to reorient the way they think around selling and marketing. And so one of the predictions is this idea of embracing digital product management. What does that mean? I mean, this is the idea of having specialists on your team that focus on both the digital channels like a marketplace, but also start taking on the role of maybe launching new digital products or digital add-ons or things like that. We also think that partners, and maybe this seems counterintuitive, if you start to go direct, if you start to sell through third-party marketplaces, you'd think that the sort of role of traditional channel partners, the resellers, the distributors might go down, but we actually see manufacturers doubling down on these partners, but especially ones that we would term non-transaction partners. So we think that this is an opportunity for those partners to reinvent themselves as helpers, either upstream or downstream of the transaction, even if they're not actually playing a traditional reseller role. Architecturally, and we'll come back to this notion of headless, if you've heard about this trend, the decoupling of the interaction tier from the processing tier, whether this is headless commerce, whether it's headless content management, architecturally, this is becoming the default. Why? Because it allows you more flexibility in terms of the interaction channels. It's enabled by things like APIs. So even though some of the quote unquote headless vendors might not ultimately be your solution, we think that architecturally the model is going to become the default for basically players up and down the value chain. And then when you look at the rise of B2B marketplaces, as I'll dig into, we see hundreds of new marketplaces being launched in verticals, around functional areas in different regions. So we think as a seller, you're going to have a widening palette of opportunity here if, and that's a big if you can sort of exercise some of these new motions and muscles that you need to sell in this fashion. So if we go into the next chapter here, why marketplaces are becoming really what we would say the new center of commerce, and not for all types of products and not for all types of sellers, but again, the clues are on the consumer side. And if you see the rise of marketplaces on the consumer side, it's creating demand for all types of business-to-business products, especially indirect products, MRO type products. We focused our efforts specifically in sort of the tech area, but you see marketplaces being used across all sorts of even non-tech areas. But within the tech area, there's a fair amount of motion happening in terms of hardware, especially things that are configurable online, certainly software. If you look at the SaaS world, if you're using Salesforce or if you're using some of the big platforms, it's expected that you'll go onto their marketplace to buy your your apps that add into the core platform or add-on services or third-party extensions and things like that. And then the role of marketplaces with services is still kind of emerging, but you see it already in some of the sort of gig sites, freelancer.com, things like that. So we think this is becoming the new center of commerce, and we also think that this requires new approaches. Now, why are marketplaces interesting for both buyers and sellers? If you go back in the Wayback Machine, marketplaces are simply a digital platform. They're also not new. I mean, fun fact, Dell launched a B2B marketplace almost 20 years ago, and then they promptly shut it down 4 months later. You know, what's different now? We think there's a lot of drivers, but fundamentally, digital platform economics drives marketplace economics. So if you look at Uber or you look at some of these consumer models, what's a platform business? It's something that gets more and more efficient as it grows. And marketplaces in a lot of ways are the sort of highest level of platform, but the currency to participate right in a tech marketplace is APIs. And as you go sort of up the maturity curve, as you have more and more transactions happening through marketplaces, we see the rise of these so-called non-transaction partners. Maybe they're brokers, maybe they're integrators, maybe they're marketing firms helping the sellers with their placement or their SEO. But the fundamental economics is what's driving this. It's both convenience and cost for buyers, but it's reach and access for sellers. Then if we dig in specifically to the B2B space, what's really driving this adoption? You could say, sure, it's riding on top of the general growth of e-commerce within B2B. So, B2B is, lagging in a lot of ways B2C e-commerce adoption, but it's obviously much bigger. And you see the sort of percent of selling that happens through e-commerce is slowly ticking up. So marketplaces certainly are sort of drafting behind this trend. But then more fundamentally, it's just easier and there's more access points. So both for buyers, right, there's more full service buyer tools. Why did the Dell approach not really work 20 years ago, where there just weren't as many full featured experiences, the buyer tools weren't as good. Current state-of-the-art marketplaces allow you to do everything from research through product comparison, through contracting, through purchase. So the buyer tools are just so much better, and they're full service, which is important, obviously, when you're selling in a procurement style environment. There's also much better seller tools, and that's something that I know we'll hear more about in this session. For listing and creating and syndicating your product content, these tools just weren't around 20 years ago. And then you have the demographic shifts, right? This notion of the modern buyer sort of taking over, right? As the older IT procurement managers start to age out of organizations, you have a more sort of a next wave of buyer coming in, both within classic IT, but also especially around line of business. And I've seen this like in my previous marketing roles where my marketing teams bought an awful lot without checking in with IT. So we have sort of two motions here. One is the line of business buying more stuff. Two is the sort of demographic shift towards convenience and speed first buyers. Three would be certainly competitive pressures. If I can save time and money as I'm buying things, certainly I'm going to this channel. And then this sits against the backdrop of businesses overall becoming more digitally mature. So they're not only aware of the benefits of buying in this fashion, but in many cases, they are also sellers. So that maturity lifts both their ability to sell digitally and their ability to buy digitally. And then back to the prediction, there's literally hundreds of B2B marketplaces coming online. And so there's just more options for both buyers and sellers. So what does this mean for sellers? So maybe your head's spinning, you're like, well, wait a minute. We already have our existing e-store. We're already selling through distributors, maybe through retailers. We maybe have a dealer network. Should we be testing out some of these new channels? Should we be testing Amazon Business or Alibaba or WeChat if we're selling in China? The answer, maybe unfortunately, is all of the above. And so fundamentally, we think that sellers just need to rethink not only their channel mix, but also what their marketing approach is for those channels. And so at a high level, if you go into sort of marketing speak, right, and you think of the demand funnel, it's less about that in a marketplace environment, and it's more about market education, top of the funnel, It's about reference selling. It's about ratings and reviews potentially, which is scary, right? In a classic B2B setting, you usually wouldn't be relying on social proof. In a marketplace, maybe you will be. And it also means that you may be trading sort of access to audience for less control. And let's drill into that a little bit, because if you're selling, again, I'm sort of picking on and using Amazon Business as an example throughout this discussion. But if you're selling certain products through Amazon Business, you certainly get access to a much more robust audience, but you're going to be competing in categories when there's many more options. So it's really this idea of owning that digital shelf. And my argument, as I'll get into, is what does that mean? It means that even as a hardcore, say, manufacturer of heavy equipment, you may need to think a little bit more like a CPG brand. So what does that mean? So thinking like a CPG brand, or if you will, thinking like a SaaS company, because they're both similar selling and marketing motions increasingly. So what does a CPG brand do or a SaaS company do that's different? So, and this oversimplifies things, but it's to create some contrast here. So the old way of thinking, right? It's very transactional. Let's get the deal. The new way of thinking is, well, let's get deals now and all the way into the future so we can maximize customer lifetime value. And Forrester talks a lot about customer lifetime value really as the ultimate measure of success. Subscription businesses get that. Transactional businesses less so. So we need to start thinking a little bit more like a subscription business, where it's the share of wallet over the lifetime, not just the next deal. And maybe that next deal you're going to discount, or you're going to offer free samples or bundle in support, because the goal is to build that loyalty that then pays off over the long term. The old way of thinking, and this is for some companies still sort of the new way, right? Which is we need to focus on, we need to own our e-store, our e-commerce storefront. We're testing out direct to consumer or direct to business buyer models. We need to own this e-store. Well, yes, and right, in this new way of thinking, back to this whole palette of channels, we need to optimize all of our digital channels, which may include an e-store that might become more of a full service marketplace. People are probably wondering, well, wait a minute, what's the difference between an e-store and a marketplace? Really, the difference is whether you are facilitating transactions on behalf of third-party sellers, right? So you could launch a marketplace as sort of an extension of your e-store. But if you're just selling your own products, it's not a marketplace, it's an e-store. Once you start to bring in third parties and you're facilitating those transactions that are fulfilled by that third party, then that's a marketplace. Number three, market intelligence is in a lot of ways, and I've lived this in some of my marketing roles, it slowly comes back from the field, right? That it's sort of like the telephone game of the dealers heard this and they pass it to the distributor, which goes into your product team that makes its way back to engineering. And there's this slow kind of flow of data back from the field, which by the time it gets to you may or may not be exactly what the market needs. So in this new way of thinking, because these channels are digital, we can more readily see some of these buying patterns, and the exchange that you do with your marketplace partner is really trading some of that control and obviously a commission for these market signals, for the sell-through data and things like that. Now you could say also, well, isn't Amazon just going to compete with me because they see the sales data as well? Well, it depends, right? And this is something that, the starting point for most sellers is, which products are you selling direct versus selling through the channel, and sort of going through a evaluation of which products are going to be good test cases for selling through a marketplace. And in some cases, we see this in the consumer area, you sell through Amazon, then Amazon launches their own brand. That's always a risk. It's always the case. I think it's less so in terms of B2B, but it certainly is a consideration. A couple more things in terms of old versus new, and then we'll dig into some of the marketing approaches. Old way, back to sort of marketing speak, it's all about the demand funnel generating leads and handing them off to your dealers, or cultivating them with your distribution partners or your other go-to-market partners. That's not going away, but we need to think more holistically about market education, yes, but differentiation. Because now, again, you may be selling next to other products. And to me, back to this thinking like a SaaS or like a subscription company, it may be less about selling that initial product. It may be more about bundling in accessories, optional services, insurance, sort of bonus content, bonus data, things like that. So the bundle to me, and any American Pickers fans on the line, you know Frank's favorite thing is the bundle, right? This is the thing in marketplaces as well, is creating bundles of value, and which again helps you with loyalty, but also helps you with lifetime customer value. The old way of selling, and if you've been in the software industry, you've been in other sort of tech areas, right? It's about the price book. It's about who gets what types of discounts, and you get a deal and you get a deal. And not that that's just going to totally go away in this environment, but within a marketplace environment, pricing is usually transparent. It's right there out in the open. In some cases, it's driven by demand. We see that if you study the way that Amazon will reprice things on a continuous basis. So that's an area where you have to get comfortable with competing in certain categories, and the fact that in a marketplace, it may be more transparent, which means you need more content to tell the story around that price, because it's not just the price point, it's also the value proposition, selling outcomes, and how do you bring that to life with product information, product data, product walkthroughs, rich media, things like that. And then finally, the last thing, which maybe sounds obvious, but if you've purchased at scale computer software, computer hardware, I'm an old tech guy, this notion of lock-in, right, is always sort of great for vendors, less great for purchasers. You know, if I'm a seller, I want to lock in those accounts, and let's get the 3-year deal or the 5-year deal and lock people in. In the new way, it's more of a SaaS style, right? We have to be agile. We have to embrace this subscription mindset. And arguably, as you structure your selling and your go-to-market teams, it's less about acquisition, because if you're selling on a marketplace, the leads may come in, the audience may be generated by that marketplace. It's more about the customer success and enabling people to consume your products and be successful with them, so that they get loyal, so that they recommend the product, so that they purchase more and more follow-on items. So some interesting things to think about here. We also think that a lot of, and I've talked to, gosh, probably a couple hundred manufacturers and distributors since I started focusing on B2B commerce in my role at Forrester, as we've done our marketplace research, as we do our research into different types of content and commerce solutions. It's clear that we need to create new marketing motions, new skills within our organization. This is a bit of an eye chart, so I won't get into all the detail, but at a minimum, we think that those skills span everything from sort of basic product marketing, things like being expert in paid search and SEO, so your products can be found, through supporting them through product information and syndication of that product content into the packaging. Maybe you might have different versions of your product for different marketplaces, different geographies. The role of APIs, if you're selling software products, you can plug into existing software marketplaces. Pricing becomes sort of an interesting discipline in this environment, where it's both based on classic pricing approaches, but also much more market-driven, real-time, driven by competitive factors. So you may be tracking competitors more than ever before. Social proof is an interesting one. If you've ever done marketing or selling of consumer products, it's really essential, right? The ratings and reviews, especially this time of year, if you're online buying electronics, you're going to be buying those 4- and 5-star items. You're not going to be buying the 2-star items. We see this pushing in to the sort of B2B environment as well. And Jay McBain, who covers channels for Forrester, talks about this idea of B2B marketers need to become community marketers, which is kind of a cool idea, not just because you're selling in a community environment like a marketplace, but because you start taking on characteristics of sort of, again, that CPG brand that's cultivating, curating, promoting ratings and reviews, and it is important what other people are saying. And then overall, and this is kind of the envelope for everything we're talking about here, is both the buy side and the sell side are being influenced by this shift towards digital in general, and the digital maturity. Now, if you're like, wow, we're just getting started, you're in good company, right? So we track the digital maturity of all companies across, I think, 7 different geographies around the globe, and roughly 14% of organizations are digitally advanced. Roughly 45, 48% are intermediate in terms of the maturity, and the balance are beginners. So the good news is a sliver of the market, especially in B2B, are digitally advanced. So you have some time. And also, if you're going down this path with marketplaces, you have to master e-commerce, right? Because you need to know how to sell your own products before you start pulling in other third-party products. And then once you commit to either being part of, or in some cases, launching your own marketplace, and I have conversations every day with merchants, with sellers who are thinking about doing that, you have to be committed to, drive traffic to the marketplace, attract the influencers, establish the brand in your segment. So it's not like you can just open it up and expect that people are going to come, because there's a lot of other options. In many cases, they're searching on Google to find those options. So let me look specifically at, and this is one of my favorite charts from sort of the Forrester archives, which highlights really all the range of product content that drives what we've called moments across the journey. And so when you start to look at sort of the whole customer life cycle, and when people are starting to basically search and then start to engage, and then they discover different types of options, and then they explore specific attributes of products, and then they get ready to buy, and they start to look at sort of what type of support is provided, and they start to consume those products. There's literally dozens of flavors of product content and product information and supporting data and supporting rich media that helps in this journey. So this is something that people have had to think about, pre-marketplace and pre-digital, but it just becomes both, I think, richer in terms of the digital channels, but also it highlights just the range of product content across this journey. And this enables you not only to differentiate on this digital shelf, but honestly, it helps drive loyalty, which, as we see sort of markets turn, it's going to become more about loyalty than acquisition, right? We need to hold on to our best accounts. We need to support them through that whole journey. And so product content really, as the title of this session discusses, it is about content, and it is about the intelligence that you can gather as people interact with that content through their journey. And the more engaging content you have, the more digital signals you get. The more digital signals you get, the more you have insights into how people are in fact, discovering your product and how they're buying it and how they're using it. And then you can use that insight with some of your other products. So don't sort of underplay the fact that product content is more important than ever, but also we can bring it to life. We can deliver it in new ways. We can syndicate it in new ways because of digital technology. The other thing to mention is the good news is when you talk to B2B sellers, people who own those digital channels, and this is actually data from a year ago, and you ask them what their priority is, the good news is that when you get past sort of top level marketing growth and investing in marketing, they're investing in site content, number 2, they're investing in SEO, number 3, multi-channel, number 4. So the good news is that at least the market is aspiring to do some of this, and content and SEO and sort of the presentation of that and the orchestration of that is becoming more and more front and center. So that's a good sign to me that people are recognizing this, and in fact, they're investing in this as well. So let me sort of dig into chapter 3 sort of the story here. So if we talked about the state of commerce and we talked about why marketplaces are providing an opportunity, I think it's really important for everybody on the line to think about maybe more broadly commerce and content as part of experience delivery, right? So whether you call it experience-driven commerce or you just call this at the broadest level digital experience delivery, we think that you can start to reduce friction and drive more opportunity and create loyalty if you start to think about how you're creating those experiences, as I just mentioned, across that whole value chain and customer lifecycle. And we have a model for thinking about this in my team. So I look after our digital transformation research, sort of have a daunting set of things that I look after that John mentioned in the opening. But our North Star is this idea here of an experience stack or experience architecture. And when you're talking about B2B commerce, we think you have to talk about experience and you have to talk about a holistic experience strategy. So what does that mean? That's the set of services and touch points and experiences that in fact enable commerce opportunities. And then there's the supporting technologies, the building blocks for content, data, transactions. And then there's the levers, and these are the things that we think sort of bring this to life. It's the insights, the data, right, that gives you opportunity to optimize, to target content, to basically learn every time somebody has a digital touch. And then there's the automation levers in terms of not only maybe the classic things like, hey, we're going to have a self-serve, an automated voice assistant or a chatbot, but I'm more interested in sort of how you use automation to create and then deliver and then optimize some of these experiences. So let me dig in a little bit more because against this backdrop, and we use this picture probably in more engagements than anything else that my team does, because again, it ties together what are the core pillars, content, data, transactions, and supporting levers, insights, and automation for experiences in service, in many cases of commerce use cases. So within this environment, I just wanted to highlight a few things because this is where we see a lot of the interest, but also a lot of the demand. So within the content pillar, this is where you have content management systems and digital asset management kind of blending and merging. But this is also where you have what we would frame sort of modern product information management. And we see these three things and we're covering them more holistically. So we moved the PIM coverage into my team back in the fall. We think of CMS and DAM and PIM being sort of the core set of content services that drive experiences and drive commerce, and how you're both enriching and ingesting and blending this content, and then how you're distributing it out to your touch points and your transaction sites is really core. This is sort of a foundational thing for how you're going to digitally enable your channels, whether you're just working with your classic distributors or you're working with a new age marketplace or you're going direct to consumer. That content in fact powers those experiences which power buying opportunities. And then mentioned a little bit before, right, there's two other things that I wanted to highlight. One is this rise of headless, as we talk about in our predictions, and Joe Sisman, who covers B2B commerce for me, has written a fair amount about the role of headless. Mark Grannon, who covers CMS and also DX platforms, had a really nice blog a little while back called Rated H for Headless for mature audiences only, which we thought was kind of clever. But it points out that the headless model does require a certain level of sophistication, but some of that is just going to be handled by your vendor. But if you're going to jump into headless, it does require a certain amount of capability to take advantage of it. And then back to some of the work I've done pre-Forrester, I'm a big believer in open source as a supporting technology that powers everything from search through content management, that we think there's a lot of efficiency from using products that build on open source, but also in tandem with low code if you follow that trend at all. So we think that open source and low code kind of goes together like hand in glove. Open source providing some of those components that can be used within a solution. Low code powers the extensions at the edge of that solution. And then there's obviously agile design. If you're going to think like a CPG or think like a SaaS company, you better be, if not doing big A agile, you better be doing kind of little a agile in terms of experimentation, rapid turns, testing things, adjusting, testing, adjusting, etc. So a quick word on PIM as I wrap up. So as we moved the PIM coverage into my team, Amanda Leclerc, who's the lead analyst on that, we talked a lot about sort of an opportunity for PIM to kind of break out of its operational roots as we moved it into our digital experience coverage. And one of the ways that we're trying to message that is simply talking more broadly about product experiences, right? So product information, you can't rip that out of the product experience, right? They're one of the same. And so we think that especially in a marketplace setting, that enriching content in service of experience is how you differentiate. But if you just do that front end and you don't deliver the operational payoff, well, it's kind of a non-starter. So we wrap this up into the notion of product experience management, which links not only PIM with CMS and DAM as well, but also with some of the operational side of things. Because if you just provide an amazing experience on the front end, people like, I want to buy this thing, and then you make it difficult to configure, or the logistics on the back end aren't very good, or you make it hard to bill and set up the account, then it's not a good experience. The second thing is, and you see in the screen there, goodbye PIDs, right? So Forrester covered sort of the syndication part of PIM as its own category. We really think that if you look at the user point of view, there's no information without syndication. If I can't get that information as an end consumer, as a buyer, it doesn't exist. So the value of product data is only as good as its ability to be delivered to that customer at the point of need on their preferred touch point. So going forward, we've folded in the syndication coverage, and we think that it's not an add-on, it's sort of core to your strategy. So we're sort of waving goodbye to PIDs as we welcome PXM, and then embedded intelligence, right? All the data that we're gathering. There's so many opportunities for not only automating some tasks like product tagging, or providing insight on where the catalog needs to be filled in, but this notion of little AI. And I started my career many moons ago as an AI sort of data scientist. I'm very sensitive to people overplaying the role of AI. We think this embedded sort of little AI approach, which may start with something like smart tagging of product information, or giving you some insight into which combination of offers would get people to bundle a larger solution when they click buy. This is a big deal, especially in terms of driving the performance of your content, right? I want to build the best asset that allows me to recoup the investment in that downstream. And also, how can we do this at scale and drive operational efficiency? These are big deals. So I'm a little bit down on big AI, but I think little AI, especially when it's embedded, is a beautiful thing. So wrapping things up, if I take a page from Amanda's latest research, and this is really what she calls an adaptive PIM mindset. Certainly you need to consider sort of both your current needs, but also what's the future customer going to want? Are they going to natively be on a marketplace? Are they going to expect rich media along the way? Do they want to see that product spin? Do they want a video explainer as they configure your products? We think that you can understand that if you take a look at journey maps, and we talk a lot about starting your digital transformation by looking at the customer journey. I think that's still good advice here, but not just in terms of understanding the points of need, but also see what content is demanded. Remember that little wheel with the 50 different types of content? See where that content demand is, but you know what that is if you study the journey and see what people are asking and what they're consuming currently. Second point would be, as a seller, how are you thinking about your go-to-market changing, right? Just fundamentally, are you evaluating the effectiveness of your existing partners? Are they also moving towards, if they're a distributor, are they launching their own marketplace? How digital are they? Are they more digital than you want to be? Are they less digital than you want to be? What's the influence of marketplaces in your specific sector? Depending on, again, what you're selling, how you're selling it currently, who you're selling it to. If you're selling it to line of business buyers, they want to buy it online. If you're selling indirect goods, tech goods into almost every industry, a lot of that's going into a marketplace because it's packageable. As we say, if you can put a SKU on it, you can sell it in a marketplace. So what do you do? Think about how you're preparing your content to anticipate some of these use cases, which means not only tagging, but also thinking about the personas and doing some of that kind of hardcore digital marketing work. And then ultimately, it is about people as well as tools and machines, right? So we have a lot of inquiries about how do we change the business by attracting the talent that we need to create some of these new channels and to support some of these new channels. And that is not just the talent part. and the culture part, but thinking about future-proofing your content and having the team ready to think about, a voice interface might unlock this value, or augmented reality, or things like that. So we think that that's both the talent, but it's also the technology. So with that, let me turn things back to John, and I think we have some questions to take a look at.
Yeah, we'll get to those at the end, Alan. Thank you very much. That was really great stuff, as usual. I wanted to pick up on a couple of the things that you mentioned and add some additional thoughts on how PIM has become more strategic and has begun to move beyond its operational roots, which was one of the recommendations you were making. And at Akeneo, we fundamentally believe that there's no way to deliver a good customer experience unless you have compelling product experience. And this point of view is supported time and time again by what our customers tell us. And due to the variation in the types of products that B2B organizations sell, everything from simple things like hand tools to really complex systems with assemblies and add-ons and so forth, it's even doubly important in the B2B world. I also remember reading some research from Forrester last year that talked about consumer online purchasing and how the number one reason people shop online is price, but every other reason that people buy online has to do with access to product content. And so as B2B buyers are also buying online for themselves, it's natural to think that they would inform themselves before buying by accessing as much product information as they could, especially for those really expensive items. Now, Alan, a lot of your comments this morning were focused on a lot of the e-commerce and the rise of marketplaces. And I think, we have all seen and can agree that these channels are growing in importance. And it seems like every day I read about a new B2B marketplace coming online. And you mentioned a statistic that I think 17% of e-commerce was taking place, or 17% of B2B commerce was taking place on e-commerce sites. But there is still that 83% that covers the rest. So we think the B2B landscape is very much an omni-channel one, and that e-commerce and marketplaces are just a couple of the places where B2B organizations are looking to be present and to exploit. So I'm not going to go through every one of these, but I do want to talk about just a few of them in this omni-channel scenario. So the first one I want to talk about is digital transformation. That's, of course, getting a lot of attention in the press and among manufacturers, and it certainly includes building e-commerce sites and building marketplaces or selling on an industry marketplace, as well as supporting mobile buyers in some cases. But this transformation doesn't necessarily mean you have to build a web store. It could be a focus on making your website more robust as a destination to do all of that pre-purchase research that buyers are doing today prior to contacting a distributor. Digital transformation also could mean offering new interactive ways to share product information with your prospective buyers. So one example is a product configurator, where you can use a digital application or platform to select the options you want for a system. Or another example is in the building industry, where they have building information modeling, which is used to generate and manage digital representations of physical spaces and products that fit within those spaces. So here, for example, you see for Tarkett, which is a flooring manufacturer, they've got a little environment on their website where you can select the type of room and then select the type of carpet tile or flooring you want and the color and design, and then fill the room, just like you might do if you were buying a car online, where you can see the color and the wheel selection. So that and like augmented reality, which you mentioned at the end, that can be useful to help reduce sales cycles. Another example there might be buyers who are using mobile devices at their home location to view how customized equipment will fit in that allotted space. So that's kind of what the building information modeling is about, rather than having your buying teams making multiple visits to a factory. Another common case we see is using digital transformation to support a mobile sales force so that they can access centralized product information while making in-person sales calls with B2B buyers. And this whole trend, I think, is really interesting because not only is it about trying to increase sales and increase reach, but it also provides opportunities to reduce the cost of servicing your customers, such as by lowering the barriers to get at information, to understand pricing, and to shorten the time to close a sale. So there's a lot of promise in the digital transformation space, but it's not just limited to figuring out how to sell directly on those sites. Print is another cool one. A lot of people have declared print is dead, but we don't see any evidence of that. We think B2B is still highly dependent on print, and you need to be able to create and manage product information in a whole bunch of different formats to support hard copy printing, creating sales materials like solution brochures, product data sheets, other leave behind pieces that you might distribute at a point of sale, such as a distributor location or at industry events, things that need to be printed as well as shared by email or from a website. Recently we did some work on my home and we had to go to the plumbing showroom, and they have some items that are for display in the showroom, but when the minute got down to, which one do we want to select, they went to these shelves and shelves of 3-ring binders to pull out, printed brochures that talked about all the attributes and whatnot of the products. So print is really important there. Another need here is to support sales in different regions or markets where the information is either slightly different, maybe different units of measure, maybe different regulatory disclosures, or you want to translate it into another language for that local market. So you need to have some sort of a master template that can either be distributed to your local teams for that customization, or it can be centrally produced and sent out as needed. So print has not gone away. It still remains something that you've got to manage a lot of information for. Collaboration is another key theme that we're seeing in B2B, between B2B manufacturers and distributors who are looking for ways to create that accurate, comprehensive product information in context, and to be able to simplify exchanging that information between each other. So a manufacturer, for example, might need to export product information specific to a distributor's requirements, or for warehouses where customers are going to buy and then buy online and then pick up locally. In that case, a distributor in some cases, distributors can dictate the format and the fields that are required for the product data. And so the manufacturers need to have a way to create the exports of subsets of their catalog, or create some customized data values per distributor, in the case where a distributor is a separate channel for the manufacturer to send their catalog. Also, sometimes manufacturers and sellers use industry standard formats to acquire product information, but also want to enrich it beyond what comes in some of these formats like eTIM and BMECAT and FabDis and so forth. And then once that happens, you need a place to track the flow of information and store that enriched product data. I mentioned before the mobile sales force, using tablets to access product information in an online way. That's another form of collaboration. And so it's important as you're sharing information around and amongst these groups to have it be accurate and consistent and in context for each of those touch points. Another big area of focus that we see with B2B manufacturers and sellers is wanting to foster their brand image, which is important because success in B2B has a lot to do with building credibility and building trust. So part of this brand image can be from around promoting your brand values, appealing to a patriotic sentiment, being green or eco-friendly, and underscoring your ability to provide service after the sale. It also is useful for helping ease the buying process. More and more, we're starting to see buyers aren't just a single person, but they're whole teams of people that are involved in the process. And so the information users to the procurement group, to the finance group, even to legal. Another brand image topic that we're seeing B2B enterprises use to differentiate themselves is to position themselves as being the experts in their profession. So from a product point of view, this means being experts in the products, not only how they're described and what they do and how they work, but also how can they be used? What can you use this product for, and create that connection and that trust. And then the last thing we're starting to see more and more of is the really advanced ones are looking at staging and experience for their buyers, so much like a lot of the B2C firms do. So one great example is John Deere, who have these Drive Green events where potential customers can come to a marketing event and they can read and learn about the products, but they can also jump in the seat and test drive the equipment and dig holes create, plow the field and so forth. So that's the kind of experience you're never going to get from an e-commerce site or from a print catalog. Data governance is another key theme. This is all about accuracy and compliance, control over the processes, control over the teams involved in managing the information, as well as interoperability between systems to ensure that no data is compromised. So those are some of the things I wanted to mention, but really the summary here is that regardless of your commerce initiative or the challenge you're undertaking or the theme you're pursuing, the common thread through all of these is having high quality and trusted product information, without which you're going to fail in one way or another through any of these channels. So product information, therefore, we like to say is the cornerstone of the product experience. It's the lifeblood of product experience, which you need for a great customer experience. And that data has to be accurate, has to be comprehensive, has to be trusted, and it has to be in context for each channel. There's no one experience that you can create. There's no one set of information you can create and then use it verbatim in every single channel. Every channel has its own rules. The length of a field in your print catalog is going to be a lot longer than a description field. It's going to be a lot longer than you might have if you're using, Alexa to do a search. You're going to have something somewhat shorter for that. So each one of these channels has its own rules that you've got to deal with and maintain. So PIM, as we said, and as you mentioned, Alan, is core to this, and it becomes, operationally important, but the whole process, the whole stack becomes a much more strategic component that's key to support this omni-channel selling. So what's it mean to deliver this great product experience? What are some of the characteristics that need to be handled? So here's a short list. You can consider it a starting point to think about what your product catalogs require and how you're going to manage this information and serve the different channels where you want to be. But you certainly don't want to be having to solve that problem separately for each channel, especially in that omni-channel context. So here's my list. You might think of some other things that might be important for your particular industry, but one is just managing complexity. You might have spares, you might have add-ons, different assemblies, which items work together. That's all information you need to manage and track. Dealing with the size of your catalog. Maybe you have a small number of SKUs, but you've got really long, complex list of product attributes to manage. Or maybe you have a lot of SKUs and you have a shorter list of technical attributes, or maybe you've got a lot of both. And then you start adding in digital assets like images and documents and so forth, and then highly descriptive information. And the volume of the data then becomes pretty large pretty quickly. I mentioned industry standards before, being able to deal with those formats, being able to further enrich your information beyond that. Localization and translation. If you've got aspirations to conduct business in other locales and other languages, you'll have to figure out how do you make sure that the product information is translated, that the units of measure are correct in the other locale, that you've got all of the regulatory information sorted by region that needs to be displayed. So all of that needs to be managed somehow. The wide range of product prices for B2B items also impacts the way you conduct your product information management. Describing a $10 hammer sold to contractors is pretty simple, but if you're selling a used jet engine on a spares marketplace, an aviation marketplace, that's going to be probably a bit more complex. So it has a direct correlation to how much information you're probably going to have to manage. I talked about collaboration, managing information across internal teams. You may have multiple groups handling different channels within your company, or if you're a distributor and you need to manage multiple manufacturers or suppliers, maybe you want a way to help those partners help you by providing information to you that you can then govern the process to validate that data before publishing it. I mentioned managing images and documents with textual data. That includes things like your marketing brochures, your material safety data sheets, and so forth. Even managing regulatory information that may be in a separate document. All of that stuff needs to be managed along with your textual information. And then the last thing I mentioned, enabling product configurations to simplify order processes. So it's quite a wide range of needs. And to the extent your products need to fulfill many of these requirements, you can benefit from a single place to manage, govern, and validate and publish all that data. So what we would propose is to have in place a product experience management process to manage this. And so it kind of looks like this. There are these steps. You've got information in your organization, external to your organization, probably from suppliers. You may have your digital assets managed in a specific DAM. But the first thing you need to do is collect that information, bring it together. Second is you need to standardize it. The same data from more than one source is likely different, and it'll need to be standardized so that you get consistency in the information used in your downstream systems. You need to enrich it. This is the main step where you're filling in the missing attribute fields, creating emotional descriptions, appending the images to the associating the images with the item, and making your product catalog complete and compelling. And then contextualization. This is the heart of PXM. You know, I mentioned earlier, one product experience doesn't work everywhere. So you've got to put your product data in context for that channel. Also managing the translation is part of that contextualization and transforming the data to manage different sizes and so forth. And if you're using images, perhaps this is more of a B2C thing, but you know, culturally appropriate images need to be configured for display. You may need to manage images as they're consumed on different channels. And then the last mile is really the distribution, the syndication. How do you get the product information once it's complete and accurate into the hands in your various channels? So fortunately, and now we get to our sponsor's message here. We at Akeneo, we offer capabilities in our PXM solution to enable you to deliver on this process. There are some broad categories that are listed here. I'm not going to go through them, but I invite you to contact us for more detail in any of these areas that correspond to your needs. So, you know, what's the benefit? Our customers tell us that a solution like ours has enabled them to meet their business objectives from their digital transformation, their print, their other commerce initiatives, as well as bring increased productivity and efficiency to their internal teams. So I've listed a couple of examples here from our customers SLV, our lighting manufacturer in Germany, and Petra Industries, who are a wholesale distributor in Oklahoma. And we've got customers in a wide variety of both B2C and B2B industries who are seeing similar results. And here are a couple of examples from our B2B stable of customers. So we're running up towards the end here. I just want to conclude with a couple of key points that I hope you got out of this webcast. The first is how Allen talked about the lessons from B2C experiences are rapidly coming into B2B, particularly in digital transformation and the appearance of more marketplaces. But the traditional approaches to marketing and selling don't go away. They adapt. And by adding e-commerce and marketplaces, you're basically adding more channels. Each one has its own rules, and so you need to work within the context of each channel. Experience is becoming an operative word. It's part of the B2C lessons that we as B2B firms can exploit. And while the platforms offer an opportunity to deliver better customer experiences, at the core is a great product experience. And a PXM solution can be a real accelerator, a driver of business value from your commerce initiatives, and they're playing an increasingly strategic role as companies seek to win. So we're going to take a look at the questions. I think we probably have time for one. But before we do that, I just wanted to suggest a couple places where you might learn more. One is downloading our Product Experience Management for Dummies book. It's available on akeneo.com. It gives some background on what PXM is, what's required, how product experience management has become a new profession, and what it can bring to your commerce initiatives. We also blog regularly, weekly, about interesting topics in our industry, so you can check our blog. We recently wrote a couple of articles that are relevant to B2B in particular. And of course, if you're anxious to learn more about the capabilities that I briefly showed you and how they might apply to your commerce initiative, I invite you to contact us via email or via phone at any time. So with that, let's look at one question we got here. Let's see. Here's a question, Alan, you might be able to help with. It's from a question about marketplaces. This person is in the cycling industry and they're working for a retailer. And their comment is that, the margins in the marketplace are just very thin, very small, and they're wondering about, I guess, if that's a valid strategy for them. So what would you advise to somebody who is looking at marketplaces but is struggling with justifying it from a financial perspective?
Yeah, so this is not an uncommon question. You may use a marketplace to test out new products or new markets, but the end game is to go through more traditional channels. So in a way, those are sort of loss leader type experiments. The other thing that we're seeing, especially in some of the industrial areas, is creating different lines for marketplace selling so that there's lower cost options, and they sort of build in margin into that line so that they can be price competitive, but they still don't sort of wreck the economics of those, say, consumables or those replaceable parts or things like that. So there is certainly a trade-off. The ultimate answer would be launching your own marketplace, and then you basically set the rules. But in the interim, I think that people are encouraged to do experiments with marketplaces. But if you look at the punchline in the report that I wrote on Think SKUs, not SOWs, I think the second recommendation was do the math, right? Is it going to work for you, or is this only going to be forever a loss leader, which still might be a valid reason to use it as a test channel, but not a profit channel.
Great. All right, well, thank you very much, Alan. Thank you for participating in our event today. We're slightly over time. I apologize for that, but I think we had a lot of great content today. And folks who are listening in, if you do have further questions, feel free to reach out to us and we will get back to you as soon as we can. So with that, we'll end today's event, and thank you again for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.